if you gaze for long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you.
First, this experience was back about 15 years ago, while I was vacationing in Vietnam. My religious belief is Buddhism. I can still remember the details very vividly. Each summer my family would go to Vietnam to visit my mum's side of the family when I was younger. My grandpa was a very well-known village priest. This one year when I was about 10 years old, we only had a couple of days left before we would have to fly back home. We would rent out a big van to drive us to the airport, and normally we would rent it out for a couple of days and drive to the city. We lived in a village, and the drive there would take about 6 to 8 hours, so we would go 2 days before and stay at a close-by hotel by the airport. Emotions were high since we were leaving my grandparents and family members. I remember crying and being tired from packing and traveling. Only a couple of my aunts and uncles were able to come and drop us off at the airport. We were well on our way, and about 3-4 hours in, our van breaks down in the middle of nowhere, except we happened to stop at a small shop that sold some snacks, and there happened to be an auto shop attached. We were all happy since we didn't have to call anyone to come drive and pick us up. We were all tired from the heat, and our emotions were at an all-time high due to the fact that we knew we would be saying goodbye to our family soon, and from just being simply on the road for long hours at a time. My aunt, who tends to have poor health, was the one who got possessed. I remember when we finally got the van fixed, we were gathering everyone back into the van to head to the city. We still had about 2-3 more hours to go. My aunt kept saying no, she did not want to leave with us. We all found that odd. Her demeanor had changed, and my mum actually noticed she was not being herself. So we tried again. She wouldn't come with us. She kept saying that she did not know who we were, and why would she want to leave with a bunch of strangers? My aunt then asked my uncle for a smoke. She is a non-smoker. This is when my mum, aunt, and uncle all realized it was not her. She took the smoke, lit it, and walked towards a chair to sit down. When she sat down, she had her legs opened, kind of sitting like a guy while smoking. My family realized she was possessed by a gentleman. We had to wait until he finished his smoke, and he then started wanting to smoke 3 cigarettes at the same time. Finally, my mum said, "Hello, Uncle. Let's go in the van. All of us are waiting for you to join us on a trip." She had to urge him to get in the van, and it took about an hour or so for him to step foot in the van. I remember being scared, so I sat at the very back. The gentleman was sat next to the window seat, in the middle row next to my uncle. She was still holding a cigarette, smoking, kind of moving her head like side to side, sitting like she was buff, and her arms and legs were kind of spaced out to make her look bigger. My mum sat in the front. We called my grandpa, and he said the one thing the guy was really asking for was cigarettes. So he told my mum to light one up, say this specific prayer, and then throw the smoke out the window, and he should leave my aunt's body. My mum did exactly that, and once she threw the smoke out, my aunt blacked out into my uncle's shoulders. When she woke back up, she had no memory except just simply being tired. I started asking questions, and my mum said since my aunt was overly tired, she was an easy target to get possessed. It all seemed like no big deal to them. My mum was more worried about making it to the hotel in time to check in. Then my mum wanted me to share a room with my aunt, and I just remember not wanting to share the room with her, just in case. It was so bizarre, and looking back, there was quite a few instances that my mum, aunt, great uncle had these experiences happen to them. So this story is my boyfriend's, and it took me years to get him to tell me the story. You'll see why. Backstory. In Nova Scotia, Canada, there are remains of a farmhouse that burned to the ground, located in Caledonia Mills, which is outside the town of Antigonish. Over the years, it has become famous because of the fire spook. There are some dark, evil energies there. People who have visited and taken items from the property later had their houses burned to the ground. Many stories of cars not starting, sense of being followed, etc. Anyway, when my boyfriend was in his early 20s, he and some friends decided to go to find the place and check it out. Over the years, it has really overgrown and is hard to find if you aren't familiar with the area. Due to the terrain, they had to park their car and walk into the woods the rest of the way. They had bad vibes from the beginning. The whole time they walked that path, they had this awful feeling of dread and that they were being watched. They also heard something following them in the woods. Now, they checked out the remains of the farmstead. There is not much there now except for the foundation. My boyfriend explained he never felt such an awful feeling in his life. Spooked, they soon ran back to the car and got in. This is where it gets terrifying. One of his friends slipped into a sort of trance once they got into the car, staring straight ahead, not responding to his name. My boyfriend said his eyes darkened, and he had this evil look in them. He proceeded to take his knife from his pocket slowly, still ignoring his friend's shouts of alarm. They panicked and wrestled the knife from him. He still didn't speak a word, eyes full of malice and hate. Then, just like that, he snapped out of it, had no idea what he had done, visibly confused and shaken. As they left the farmhouse behind, he improved. My boyfriend struggled to tell me this story. By all means, he's nowhere close to someone who's easily emotional upset. He teared up, struggled to explain it, taking pauses, and was clearly traumatized by the memory. I asked him if he would ever go back. He said no, and forbid me to go myself. He believes an evil entity took possession of his friend, and if they hadn't been able to break him from his trance, whatever took hold of him very well might have injured or killed my boyfriend and his other friends. This story chilled me to the bone, and I figured it belonged here.
In late April 2019, I went on this tour to Ireland. EF Tours, Ultimate Ireland. I highly recommend it. And one of the things we did was this ghost tour in Killarney. I was very excited as I love ghost tours, and I was ready for something strange to happen to me. One of the guys on the trip, whom I shall call Ty, was actually a practicing witch who grew up in Salem. We met on the tour and remain friends to this day, and I remember him telling me it would be at the Abbey we were going to. The bus pulls up to our hotel, and it's decked out in creepy decor, as a traditional storyteller does his best to creep us out. Then we pull up to this empty lot at the top of a hill, where another guy says that he'll be taking us down into the valley, as the storyteller won't go down there. I talk with him as we go, chatting about my ghostly experiences and what he thought of all of this. He explains that in all the time he's worked here, he's never seen, felt, or heard a single goddamn thing. However, he also explained that the day he got the job, his friend in the village who was a white witch gave him a blessing. They also gave him a walking stick that was blessed, and he never went without it. We went to the bottom of the hill in front of this ancient, crumbling abbey that's about 500 years old. The guide tells the story of how a bunch of monks were massacred by the English, and 2 of them were tortured because they held secrets of the abbey's treasures, which has yet to be found. We step inside, and immediately I can feel all the energy of the spirits around me. I can almost see them passing around us, leaving us be. Then we move to the inner courtyard where there's this massive yew tree, as old as the abbey around it. The guide explains that the tree is cursed, so that if you touch it, you will die within a year. He even refused to go near it. However, both me and Ty agreed that the tree felt so sad, and we both had a very strong urge to go comfort it. It was also at this time I felt very remorseful, and I had the image of the 2 monks. We were not shown any pictures. In my head, for some reason, I was just thinking, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. After this, we went into a side room, and as we did this, I knew there was something just chilling in the far corner. There was something evil staring at us from outside. The guide explained that the dark corner was a hot spot for orbs, but I wasn't really listening because I was so focused on staring down the thing in the courtyard. I see its outline in my head, and it was staring me down too. I felt like I had to let it know that I was watching it, and that it couldn't come inside or hurt one of us. We were all safe here. The next stop was the most active part of the abbey, which had been hyped up all night. The plan was for all of us, about 30 of us, to stand with our backs to the walls and have the lights turned off for 60 seconds. They'd been jump scaring us all night. The storyteller did show up in a cloak after he ran down a dark hallway, and in response to this, I shoved my friends out of the way and stood in his path. But they wanted us truly to experience the weirdness of this room. The moment I stepped foot inside the room, I felt like there was a weight on my shoulders. I got a lot colder, and I was much sadder. It got to the point to where the guide for the main trip actually asked if I was okay, but I assured him I was because I didn't want to miss out on this. So we line up against the wall, and it ended up with a girl on my right and nothing on my left, with a window above me. Now it's pitch black outside, and there are industrial lights in the room. Once everyone is ready, they cut down and turn the lights off. The second the lights turn off, I start sobbing. I felt like I was mourning for every person I had ever lost, and that everything was just grief. But you know how when you cry, you can't think straight because your emotions take over. Mentally, I was fine. I knew that whatever was making me cry was not me, so I kept quiet so as not to disturb anyone else and stayed put. I also noticed a young spirit sitting on my left shoulder, and several shadow figures passed in front of me. For the last 20 seconds or so, one of them stared me down. I don't know why, but he did not like me being there. Yes, for some reason I know it was a he. And no, I couldn't tell you how. Finally, the lights come back on and I stop crying and I am totally fine once again. Everything vanishes as everyone starts filing out. Ty approaches me and tells me he noticed all of the spirits around me, and he specifically talks about the young spirit on my shoulder before I tell him. We talk about that, and we come to the conclusion that one of the spirits used my body as a vessel to cry. The next and final stop on the tour is the outdoor courtyard and graveyard, where there was something purely evil. I could feel the anger and the desire to hurt when we stepped outside. I pointed it out to Ty, saying that there was something watching us from that dark spot above the doorway. This man literally said, "I know, it's best to ignore it." The storyteller at this point was goofing around, scaring one of the kids because he was easy. But I kept getting really frustrated to the point where I wanted to punch him. And if you know me, you know that's not like me at all. I just wanted to get out of there. Finally, we take the path of the spirits out of the graveyard and head back to the bus. Ty and I talk to the guide and storyteller who are interested in what happened to us, and explained that lots of psychics and witches from all over have come and experienced things like this. We thanked them as we got back onto the bus. I text my friends and tell them everything that happened in case I forgot something. Then we all go into town and get drunk because we're in Ireland. Duh.
December 31st, 2009. New Year's was fun and family-orientated. My family and I went to my grandparents' house in a small, rural border town. We popped fireworks, laughed, played bingo, drank. I was 11, so of course I didn't drink. Wholesome fun, really. We were getting into morning territory, coming up on 5 a.m. Everyone is still up, drinking, having a good time. I'm inside in the living room, playing on the PlayStation 3. All of a sudden, from the back where all the adults were, there was a yell and a scuffle. First thing I thought is, oh man, somebody had too much and is being an ass. The back door opens and my mum is yelling furiously at my aunt. Why did you do that? What's wrong with you? Don't walk away from me. They're all shuffling into the house and assessing the situation. By the look of it, some of the adults who are outside don't even know what's happening. Turns out my aunt, out of nowhere, slapped my stepdad for some unknown reason. He didn't know and my mum obviously didn't either. My aunt looks in distress, like she was confused and angry about something but couldn't articulate it. By the way, this isn't in line with her character. She is usually loving and confident, charismatic and overall a warm person. She goes into her room after being persuaded to go to bed and that everyone would go to sleep and deal with all of this when everyone isn't drunk and emotional. Cool, good plan, right? Well, not 5 minutes after she goes in there, she starts to scream, guttural and violent screaming. Like bloody murder type of scream. The other adults rush into the room, and she's trying to fight my uncle. Throwing fists, spitting, cursing, scratching. He's obviously not fighting back, but only holding her so that she wouldn't hurt him. He's struggling, to say the least. He, with the help of my older brother, forced her down onto the bed, and she's still full throttle. Just hammering away with the insults and the spitting and her eyes. Oh my god, her eyes. Her eyes are usually a deep brown. Like, I noticed that they are dark brown, but not that night. That night they were black. Seriously sounds crazy. Sounds like a horror movie, but they were black. No pupils. Or I guess, all pupils. In between her screeches and insults, she would revert back to herself. She would start pleading with us to help her, crying and begging, then right back to screaming and fighting. I later realized that it may have been a ploy from the demon, trying to deceive us. Not sure, just my afterthought. My grandmother, being very religious, said this was a possession, and had a gallon of holy water that she kept in the house. She got her rosary, Bible, and the gallon of water, all while my uncle, her husband, is still on top of her, struggling to keep her down. Keep in mind, he is bigger and stronger than her, and he was having trouble holding her down. My grandmother is saying some prayer and dousing her in this holy water. I thought she was screaming loudly before. I had to leave the room. I mean, I wasn't even in the room, just in the doorway, looking in on the scene, and I had to go. It also seemed like, after she got wet, it started to stink in the room really bad, and there was no source. Like, she didn't smell any worse than the other side of the room. It was like a sour, moldy, rotting trash, sewage, disgusting smell. They went at it, exercising, at about 6:30 a.m. My mum said we have to call the father. Small town, so my grandmother had his home number. He was very hesitant to help. Usually you have to get permission from the Vatican to exercise. To be honest, I don't know if that's true or just something I've heard. Anyway, the father said, I won't come to the house for my safety, but if you bring her to the church, I'll help her. So he did. And there, it felt like a horror movie. The echoey chamber hall of the church was filled with my aunt's relentless screams and insulting banter. Before I forget, also back at the house when my grandmother tried to exercise, my aunt was speaking in some strange language, mixed in with her regular insults and screaming. There were phrases that no one could decipher. I can't remember what it was, but she only speaks Spanish and English, nothing else. Not gonna say it was Latin or anything, but it was not Spanish and it was not English. Back at the church, it was somewhat of a familiar scene, family all round, holding hands and holding her. While the father was flicking holy water with his free hand, he was holding his rosary and Bible with the other. I remember looking around and just taking in the situation. Like, what is happening? Who's going to believe me? Do I believe it? A few moments later, my brother and I notice something in my aunt's mouth. Like a grey, thick piece of lint. I'm not sure what it was. I just remember noticing it, and my brother and I just looked at each other. Like, what is that? While she was in an in-between pleading moment, my brother quickly reached into her mouth. Not very far. It was practically on her lips. Took it out and looked at it for a quick second before flicking it onto the floor a few feet away. And as if that piece of lint had something to do with it, not 2 minutes later, after taking it out, she started to calm down and fall asleep, and had bruises on her arm from Uncle holding her down. She was sweaty and tired. She was a mess. We all were. The day after, at whatever time, I woke up after being up all night, and she was okay. Back to her brown-eyed, caring, loving self, and no memory of that night past midnight. She said she remembered the countdown and the fireworks, then nothing. Just waking up and being told what had happened. I still don't know what to believe. Apparently, this type of thing had happened once before with her, in the late 80s, before I was born. She had to be exorcised by a priest. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for joining me. A huge thank you to Swamp Dweller for joining me again on my channel. If for whatever reason you are unfamiliar with Swamp Dweller, you really should check out his channel. He's an amazing narrator and a really great guy. A big thank you to all the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, please be sure to go check out my store on Teespring and maybe buy some merch. I will also be starting a Patreon soon, and will post the details when I do. And of course, a huge thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it so much. And remember,
Papa loves you.